Nerd who recognizes nerd. I'm telling you, the good Lord above said, let there be nerds. And there were nerds. And there were other nerds. And the Lord said, when you come upon a nerd, not in a sexual way, you will recognize that nerd for being what they are, a nerd. And thus, two nerds shall recognize each other.
Nerds.
This is the word of God, amen.
Harmonize. Nerds.
Going so well already.
Yeah, already.
Coming to you live
from
this recorded video.
From this void. Buddy and I found a green void.
Whoa, it's so green in here.
Yeah, remember in the Matrix when they were like, when they went into the construct and it was the white room?
Yeah.
We did it. We jacked in.
We're in the green
or
room.
off, and we're in the green room.
Because we're actors.
Because we're very, very intelligent ancient scholar Riley Freeman once said, "Game recognize game, granddad. In that spirit, game recognize game, heart recognizes heart." And I wanted to have this fun discussion.
Because nerd recognizes nerd.
Hell yes. We're going to do a sort of nerd share. Today, on our very first episode of what might not be called Nerd Share, it'll be called something much more clever. Maybe, who knows? I don't know.
Nerd swap.
So today, in this very, very kind of special thing, we talk about nerd stuff that we're nerds about, and thus putting into life that you can be a nerd about anything. It's not just about like I like Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, no, you can be a nerd about sports. You can be a nerd about trucks. Yeah. Whatever.
Trains.
So today we are nerding out and passionately talking about authors. I will be talking about one of my favorite authors, Alan Moore. Who about you, buddy?
I have no idea. I have so many. I will be talking about whoever we land on. You know, we'll just. I mean, I brought some books by some of my faves. I definitely have a favorite author in Jonathan Safran Foer, but also he doesn't have a large body of work, so I feel like there isn't necessarily that many avenues to go down. But I've also read tons of stuff by Terry Pratchett and Orson Scott Card and Chuck Palahniuk. So there are a lot of other authors that I can go to that are more like these. I know a lot of books by this person.
Nice.
But they're not necessarily my favorite author. They're just up there.
Full transparency. I might have mentioned this in either a podcast that we done or a video of some kind. I wasn't ever really a big reader growing up. I was a reader of comic books, which ironically isn't what got me into Alan Moore.
Huh.
Weirdly enough.
That is strange.
But I wasn't. I read for school, and there was a very few number of books that I was happy to read, probably because the imposition and how I was taught to enjoy a book was so against my personal taste of how I liked to enjoy things. But I remember reading, like when we read the abridged version of The Count of Monte Cristo, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I enjoyed.
That is a good book.
It is. It's a very good book. I enjoyed reading The Giver. That's a very good book. But
Plus, you are a giver.
I'm very much a giver. Here you go, buddy.
Thanks.
But yeah, transparency with that. I'm not. I feel funny because I don't have a big pool to pull from. Whereas, buddy, you very much are a reader.
I would argue that, like, saying I wasn't much of a reader, I read comic books, still makes you a reader. I mean, I do think that there's
he's so sweet. He makes me feel better.
Difference in quality between like Alan Moore comic books and like Batman behind you. You know, like But you can find that same difference of quality in something like, you know, a Jonathan Safran Foer book, which is really crafted and intricate, versus, you know, and then she touched his large throbbing member. It took no effort to write whatsoever.
You're talking about the one that it was like half as good. That popular book is like 50 Shades of like Off-White, 25 Shades of Off-White. Damn it! I f***ed up that joke. It's supposed to be 25 Shades of Off-White.
That's funny.
Half as good as 50 Shades of Grey.
25 hues of Off-White. But yeah, I mean, there are well-written books and there are poorly written books, and if you read any gamut of that, you're still a reader. So I would say the same is true of comics. Of like, you can read some crappy comics that are just there for the sort of like, it's an action hero and there's no real value to the writing, up to reading like well-written comics that have a compelling story and intricate characters, and you're still a reader at that point.
That's fair. That's cool. That makes me feel better. I perceive that there is a stigma though, when it comes to people who read comics versus people who read novels or things of that nature. Whereas there seems to be this pompous superiority to people who read a novel or a book versus a comic book.
Yeah. It is gatekeeping, is what it is. It's gatekeeping. It's people.
What do you mean gatekeeping?
So gatekeeping in the sense that if I as an authority on this get to decide what qualifies as being, an authority on this. In the art world, people who are like, oh, you draw digitally instead of drawing with like a pen on paper. You're not a real artist. Yes, you are. You still know how to draw. You can still make things appear. You can illustrate. Just because you're using a computer to do it doesn't mean you're any less of an artist.
Right.
You're just using all the tools that you have available. And also, those artists are probably perfectly capable of drawing on a piece of paper. They just are using a different medium.
Are you saying, buddy, that there is no just a singular wealth of information that just is the best that's above all of them?
I mean, as counterintuitive as that seems, I think that might be what I'm saying.
Well,
that
who knew?
If you like a form of art, then you do. Then there it is.
You kind of like it.
There's something cool that Orson Scott Card does in his writing that was compelling to me from the get-go. I've read a lot of Orson Scott Card stuff.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I was just a question. Before you go, is Orson Scott Card specifically science fiction?
To start, I mean, predominantly yes. He is predominantly science fiction. He has written a couple of fantasy novels.
Do we mean fantasy like what people would think of, like people think fantasy, they think like Lord of the Rings type?
More like fairy tale type fantasy.
Okay.
He has written, there's a, I don't know if it's a series now, but Past Watch was a book that was at least intended to be part of a series, which is sort of like historical fiction. There's a sci-fi element in that there's this group of people from like the 31st century that can look into and interact with the past. That's cool. And then like the things that happen in the past, the first one is about Christopher Columbus, and the things that happen in the past are all based in actual historical events, but they are sort of tweaked by these people in the future. So there's like a historical fiction thing that he's done. So he's branched out into other stuff, but yeah, I mean, predominantly he was a sci-fi writer to begin with, and I think has mostly stuck to that vein with a couple little offshoots.
So, since we're on Orson Scott Card, you had said that before you had gone on to there, it was the science fiction aspect before that, but you were saying something he does.
I was saying that he writes in a style which I realize now. I just read Dune recently, and the name of the author of Dune is escaping me at the moment, and I want to look it up because I'm gonna feel stupid. And everyone out there right now is screaming, "It's this! This is the name!"
If you're screaming at the screen,
Frank Herbert, that's his name.
Okay. If you were screaming at the screen, go ahead and hit that like button for how many times you screamed at the screen.
Because you can give more than one like to a video.
Or subscribe numerous times.
Like, unlike.
We're gonna fuck up the algorithm for YouTube so much that it's just gonna blow up.
But Frank Herbert, I'm realizing now, after having read Dune, I can't say this with 100% certainty, but I would guess that Orson Scott Card was heavily influenced by Frank Herbert. Because I read Dune and I was like, oh, this is an Orson Scott Card book, but sorry, Orson, a little better, like just better in terms of the way the story is structured, the depth of the characters and whatnot. But one of the main things that connects them, not like they're the only two that do this, but they write in a style that I think of as first, third person. In essence, they're writing in third person. So it's, like, then he did that, and she went there, and he did this thing. But in the midst of all that, it's written like the person is thinking themselves. They're in first person, only it's using he instead of I. So it'll be something like he knew he wanted to run away in that moment, but he was so determined to stand his ground. He held his chin as high as he could and looked so and so in the eye and said blah 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 blah. He was terrified in that moment. So and so was going to do such and such to him, and it's just written in this way where it's like we're seeing the thoughts of the character written in third person. So
it's like the person is referring to themselves in the.
But it's not like it is still written from the author's I don't know how to put that. That's where the whole first third person thing comes in. It's still written as though the author is telling the story, but the words that are being used, the way the story is being told, is really stuff that only that person would know in their head. And so when you're talking about like going into Bean's thoughts and being able to sort of hear what he's thinking when a moment happens, that is something that the two of them do very well, that Frank Herbert and Orson Scott Card do very well. That like you get some narrative of what's happening in the story, and then you go into the character's mind, and the author will sort of tell you every thought that they're having along the way that's guiding them towards that decision. It's not like that's uncommon in books, but I feel like oftentimes it's more about the narrative, and then if you really need to know something insightful from the character, it'll come out. Being able to sort of hear the character's narrative in a story told about them, like not a story told by them, but a story told about them, but you still get their narrative as well as the author's narrative. I don't know, it always felt like a cool, just when I wanted to know what the character was thinking, how the character was reacting in that moment, we would switch into what the character was thinking or reacting to.
Nice. Yeah. Do you have a favorite from Orson Scott Card?
I mean, Ender's Game, I feel like that's the easy answer, but Ender's Game is excellent.
That's like, you told me about that. Isn't that that's like a 12-book series?
So the Ender's Game is just the one book, but the Ender saga, there are 4 books about Ender, there are 4 books about Bean, and then there are some, like, another story about Ender, like things that don't really fit into the saga. They're just sort of offshoots of the saga. Those ones aren't as good. Like the offshoot books are, I don't care about them that much. But the ones in the saga are really quite good.
But just Ender's Game, that
particular book, because again, it's that an author's first book is almost always going to be their best, if not one of their best. Or sorry, I should say the other way around. They're one of their best, if not their best, because it's the book they've been working on their entire life up until that point, and then after that, like now you've got a publishing deal, you have a year before your next book is due. So now you have a year to like plot, figure out, and write your next book. Whereas you had like as much time as you wanted on the first book, all the time to go back and revise and make sure that it's exactly what you want it to be. So Ender's Game is very easily one of his best because it's a story that, it started out as a short story and then got turned into a full novel, and so he already had the framework, and then it was just sort of fleshing it out. So that one's very good. I really like the first 3 books in the Earthfall series.
What's that about? I don't know what that one is about.
It is about humans so Earth has been obliterated long, long ago. It was obliterated in nuclear war, and a bunch of people set off from Earth to find a new planet to colonize, and now it's like thousands of years later, maybe millions. I think it's thousands, but like so many years later, after this war, people on this new planet have basically forgotten Earth entirely. And in fact, they have forgotten Earth entirely because there is a satellite that orbits the planet that is tapped into their brains and keeps them from having thoughts about Earth as it was before, and also keeps them having thoughts about any technology that might lead to weapons. So that they can, this was programmed by the people who settled here, like the initial people who settled here, so that they can never again develop any kind of nuclear devices, and never, cause that kind of destruction again. So they have technology, but it can never be like turned into weapons tech.
Interesting.
But in the first book, it's called the Overlord, the thing that's orbiting the planet. In the first book, it's been out there for so long without anybody repairing it, because no one knows that it's there, because if people start to think about it, they are made to forget about it. So no one's ever gone out to repair the thing, and it's starting to break down now. And so sometimes like little thoughts can get through, and some of the characters find out that if you have just single-minded focus on this one thing, and you like write down a note for yourself about it, then when you come back to it, you're like, okay, that's the research I did yesterday. Like, I am reminding myself now I did this and this and this. Okay, so now I got to think a little further based on what I've figured out before. And little by little, they find out that there are still elements of ships, and they figure out how they can like repair them and get them out. And so they basically return to Earth over the course of the series. It's a really cool series. And I say the first 3 books because I feel like they tell the story. The first 3 books are them just getting to the ships. Like the first book is basically being able to figure out what the Overlord is and what it's preventing them from doing. The second book is them finding out that there are ships that they can go to and like how to basically get out of the city and find them. The third book is them actually going to the ships and getting them like fixed and able to move. So they don't even get off of the planet until the 4th book. And then the 4th book is them traveling back to Earth. And then the 5th book does like a skip ahead generations to like the children of the children of the children of the children, so on and so forth, of the people who came back to Earth. The first 3 are really interesting. Here's my thing about Orson Scott Card is
critique.
He has what I would call a bad habit of he's got like 4th book syndrome. He writes almost exclusively in series, and you'll find oftentimes that by the time he gets to his 4th book, whatever he had created for the characters as sort of canon in the first 3 books, he'll start to like forget about, or like he'll nerf certain things because he made the character too powerful in the 3rd book, or the characters like knew too much by the end of the 3rd book, so somehow they've like misplaced their memories in the 4th book. So there's always these things where it's like it kind of nerfs the stuff that came before. So every time I get to a 4th book in one of his series, I'm like, oh, but like before. For instance, this is a big spoiler for anyone who's interested in reading the Alvin Maker series. Tune out now.
Yeah, probably should have said that in the beginning of the video. Like there might be spoilers for stuff that.
I don't think talking about like the Earthfall series spoils anything. Like in terms of what happens in the books, there's no real spoilers there. They're really interesting, even if you take what I just said. Like they're still really interesting.
That sounds cool.
It's a really cool series. The Alvin Maker series is another Orson Scott. There's I think 7 books in that series now. In this world where Alvin Maker lives, everybody has this sort of supernatural thing called a knack. I don't know about everybody, but I think it's just about everybody. And a knack is basically like you can do something well to a magical degree. So like people who have a knack for like metalsmithing, it's not just that like I make really good swords, it's that these people have the ability to like get into the makeup of a sword and like it's almost like bending, you know, but not to the degree where like if you have a knack for water or for water control, it's not like you can use it as like I can make a wave happen. But if say you have like a leaky faucet, you can like move the water around the clog to get the faucet to run better. You know, like people have these knacks. A maker, Alvin is the seventh son of a seventh son, so it gives him like extraordinary abilities. And as a maker, Alvin has the ability to make things out of nothing, like to basically reorganize molecules to create things.
That's a godlike power.
Yes, and that's exactly it. It becomes a godlike power, and this is where I would like when I got to the fourth book, I was so like, you've nerfed this. Here's the spoiler. Here's the spoiler. I'm going to say one more time. If you want to avoid the spoiler, either turn the video off now, or I'm going to say, buddy, if you have the opportunity, put like a time code up here to when the spoiler is done. So go to this time if you want to skip the spoiler. At the end of the third book, Alvin is being, if I remember correctly, he's being chased by some enemy, and he ends up hiding in fire. Like he goes into a furnace to hide from the enemy. And he is so good at his knack by that point that as the outer layers of his flesh burn away, he is remaking the outer layers of his flesh so that he can't be harmed by the fire. At that point, he has achieved basically immortal status. Like he's achieved godlike power. Nothing can hurt him. If he gets like shot with a bullet, you know, he could just remake the bullet in his body to not be invasive anymore. He can't contract disease because he can remake the disease molecules into something that is beneficial to him. You know, like he can remake anything. He can get down into the smallest atom and turn it into something else. Was that painful? Did the book go into the fact that it was painful? No, like it doesn't hurt him because he's remaking the outer layers of his skin so quickly that it's not causing him pain.
Wow.
And
that's cool.
It is cool, but then in the fourth book, he like can't do that anymore. Like he can't remake his body anymore. He can't fend off like simple things that cause him harm. And I'm like, well, you ended the last book saying that like he could sit in fire and not take damage.
Did he ever give an explanation as to why?
No. And so this is where like the fourth book syndrome with Card is very frustrating because you don't get an explanation. You are often. Sometimes I wonder if it's just Card forgot that he gave the person that ability, and sometimes I wonder if it's sort of like the superhero origin story, where like I got them to their superpower at like book 3, and now where are they gonna go? Right. Now there's nothing more for them to learn about themselves or their power, so I got to nerf that so that they can have an arc again, you know. So yeah, that's the Orson Scott Card writes very interesting fiction. But there's that downside of it that like if you get too far into it, it's just kind of like no, you set a thing up, you don't get to go back on that. You can't like you can't change canon from the book that just happened. So
switching
nerd switch
to
that's what we'll call it, nerd switch.
The nerd switch. And then we switch. Yeah. I invert the camera to.
We change seats, and then you mirror the camera, so it looks the same to them.
And we're just like, wait. Switching from Orson Scott, who probably has a plethora of book.
Yes.
To Jonathan Safran Foer.
Jonathan Safran Foer.
And you had, I've only heard of. I did like a tiny bit of, and by tiny bit, like half of a Wikipedia page, but. The one I know is because it was a movie, the Extremely Close.
Yeah, Everything is Illuminated is also actually a movie, but Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close.
Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. I mean, kind of automatically, I told you before that I was kind of blown away by this guy's academic history. He just kind of fell into writing. It sounded like he was taking a class writing, and then he did like a thesis that turned into a book, and then it got turned into a movie, which I thought was cool. How did you even find out about this particular author?
This was recommended to me by an ex. She wasn't an ex at the time. I don't actually know a whole lot about him as an author, like as a person. I was looking at the back cover just to be like, what is there anything on there?
They said he went to Princeton, I think.
That doesn't surprise me. He writes like it. I don't mean that in like he writes like a pompous asshole. Which, sorry, people who went to Princeton, but like also you probably know a lot of you come across as pompous assholes.
Should I leave that in?
I don't know. I'm gonna get beat up by people from Princeton. But no, he just writes with such an elegance and such a skill that I'm not surprised at all that he went to Princeton.
Which one was introduced to you to start with?
Everything is Illuminated,
Nice.
Which was his first novel. It took me it was like 3 years before I actually read it after getting that recommendation. And then when I did, it was just like, oh my God, it's so good. It's just so good.
What's it about?
It is about it's honestly hard to say. It's hard to talk about what it's about because it's about so many things and also such a simple little thing. But just hit my mic. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Cut that one out.
Thanks.
So there is a character in the book whose name is Jonathan Safran Foer. So it's sort of like he's in a sort of Kurt Vonnegut style. He's inserted himself into his own novel. And it's hard to say how much of it is actually about him and how much of it is about this fictional character, him, that he's devised. But he is looking for the woman that saved his grandfather from the Nazis. And might have been like his grandfather's lover back in the Ukraine. So this is the woman who saved his grandfather.
Okay.
And so Jonathan is on a quest in the Ukraine to track down this woman, who might have been the person who saved his grandfather from the Nazis. So the sort of, I guess the A plot of the story is that it's Jonathan sort of trying to find this woman, and has so little to go on. I think there's like a picture that he has, like he has a photograph that has maybe a date on it or something.
Mm-hmm.
So he's trying to find this woman off of a photograph. He has a guide in the Ukraine whose name is Alex, and this is like another plot of the story. Alex is this kid who just is enamored with American things, enamored with the idea of being an American, enamored with Americana, enamored just with anything that has to do with America. And so he speaks in very broken English, but he is supposed to be Jonathan's translator, but then also like is not a very good translator. And also, like sometimes there are moments where it's like sometimes there are moments where he doesn't know the word to use to translate properly. Sometimes he very much does, but chooses not to. So there's this interesting, like you never quite know if you're getting the truth out of Alex or not. And so there's this story about him sort of becoming more American in Jonathan's presence, like using Jonathan as a conduit to become more American. And so that's sort of one of the subplots. And then the truly beautiful part about the book is that Jonathan starts to recount this sort of fictionalized version of the village where his grandmother and grandfather lived, like where they converged. But it doesn't start with the grandmother. Like it starts with the conception of the village, the people who first settled there. And it moves through all of these like really poetic and fantastical stories about how the village turned into just like a tiny settlement into an actual town over the course of like centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of the third plot that's going on in the book. It's just so interesting here, like watching him weave these stories together. This is actually just off of the book cover. But the idea is basically that Jonathan is sort of traveling backward in time, not literally, but just through his search for his grandmother. He's moving out of populated areas back into the rural parts of the country where there isn't electricity and there aren't paved roads, and like he's moving back in time through location, you know, if that makes sense. Meanwhile, these sort of fantasized stories of the town that he's looking for is moving forward in time, from like when it was conceived centuries ago to now, and it sort of converges on Jonathan actually making it to the town. And it's just like,
Jesus,
it's so good. It's so freaking good. It's such an amazing book.
That's awesome. That one.
Yeah, it's this one.
That's
Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer. A book review.
Look at the book and not my face of like I'm the model. Like, welcome. That's crazy. And it doesn't seem to be all that dense or thick.
It's not. But then this is the thing. I mean, as great as that story sounds just from that alone, the thing that I really love about reading Foer is that he writes prose as if it's poetry. And I mean that in the sense of, like, I don't know where the We Are Writing chapter is in here. One of the chapters, one of the stories about the town, is like the people of the town being obsessed with their history and with writing down everything so that nothing gets forgotten. And it starts with things where, like, important events, you know, this was a big day, and then it was so-and-so's birthday today, and this major thing happened, this person came to the town today. So, like, important events, things that seem like they're worth talking about. But these people become so obsessed with telling their history, with recording their history, that it starts to turn into like Abel woke up at 7 a.m. in the morning, brushed his teeth at 7:15, ate a slice of toast for breakfast at 7:20, and like just like every single thing that a person does needs to be recorded for posterity's sake. And then every now and then he'll drop in like a We Are Writing, because the important thing is that we're writing. Like we have to write this down. We have to write this down, and it starts to turn into like at 10:04 p.m. wrote We Are Writing. Like so it's like it just starts to like feedback loop on itself, and like the last page of the chapter is just We Are Writing, 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 We Are Writing. Like the whole page just over and over and over again. And it's these things that I'm like, I look at that and I'm like, it's fucking poetry. That's poetry. And he's writing a prose story. It's a prose novel, but there are these bits of poetry that get dropped into it. It is absolutely gorgeous writing. There is an example of this, and I don't exactly remember the context, but I really enjoy this too. There's in Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, part of the story that's being told is being told in letters from a grandparent, and in one of those letters, the person writing it is sort of like running out of space to write the letter. And so you watch as the chapter goes on. I'll show this to the camera in a second, but the text starts to get closer and closer and closer and smaller until it starts to overlap at the end. Mm-hmm. And then you just get these, like, it's just illegible. You get parts of text that are illegible, and you cannot see what's being said at the end. So to show you that, you get these bits of, I don't know if this is a copyright infringement to show this on the camera, but
we'll find out.
I'm doing it quickly so people can't actually read the book. But you can see the text starting to get closer as it goes on until it eventually, like, starts to overlap itself and just turn into blocks of text on the page. So stuff like that, where it's so interesting. He uses the format of the story to better tell the story. Mm-hmm. It's just so good.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm glad we're talking now. At this point, I'm glad we're talking about Alan Moore, because, I mean, you'll find out why. But I would love to borrow that
Yeah.
Whenever you get a chance.
Absolutely.
And
I recommend this to everyone should read this book. Everyone should read this book.
Are those the only 3 that you have of, or the only 2 that you have of his?
I have all of his books that I know of. These are the only 2 that I've read fully. He does not have a large body of work. He has these 2 novels. So Everything is Illuminated, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, or Incredibly Loud and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. I always mix them up.
Incredibly, extremely, and loud and close.
And loud and close. Extremely, Glenn Close, loud.
Stephen Loud.
Extremely loud, Glenn Close.
No, that was her role in Hook, because she got put in the box, and then she got scorpions thrown up in there. It's messed up.
He has a piece of nonfiction called Eating Animals, which is not a judgment of, but an examination of, like a very deep and thorough, the most deep and thorough examination of meat eating and vegetarianism that I've read, and I'm like a third of the way through the book, but I've never seen someone make such a compelling and like well-researched argument for vegetarianism. But that is nonfiction, and it's not. I mean, it still has certain elements of his style, but it's not quite as like poetic. And then he has. Do you know if he's a vegan? Well, that's largely what the book is about. Is he spent most of his life sort of oscillating back and forth between eating meat, calling himself a vegetarian, but then like giving himself excuses to not be a vegetarian.
Okay.
And then like ultimately, at the time of writing of the book, it's pretty clear that he was a vegetarian. I don't know if he still is.
Okay.
Basing off the oscillation.
Yeah, I wonder if the. I mean, it's been around for a little bit, but the big hype that's happened around veganism and stuff in the last like 5 to 8 years.
Yeah.
If that influenced him or anything, I
wonder.
No,
yeah, it was certainly before I think that book was in like 2011. But he had been touring, and according to the book, he'd been touring with vegetarianism like since he was a kid.
Okay.
So long before the hype really happened. And then his most recent novel, which I have on my shelf but I haven't read it yet, is called Here I Am. And I have no idea what it's about. But I have that one too, and I will read it very shortly.
Nice. So he sounds like the Daniel Day-Lewis of like authors. Where Daniel Day-Lewis, I'm sure he's done a lot more, but I think on IMDb he has like 17 credits. But you just know the work that he's done is a very researched and very kind of taxing role. and they're usually like 7, between 3 to some odd years apart.
Yeah. I want to say that is almost exactly what's going on with Foer. Like when he writes a book, I think he does tons of research, more than most authors would. But also, I mean, you can see in his writing, he takes the time to really craft each chapter, and further than that, sometimes each paragraph of his story. And I imagine that he writes it and then he goes back over it and just like pores over like, okay, how do I revise this chapter? One word in this chapter is bothering me, and it's this word. I'm going to sit here for 2 hours until I come up with the exact right word. It does not seem like, when reading his books, it does not seem like he's in a rush to get them written. It seems like he is taking his time to make sure that every single word in the book is exactly what he wants it to be.
Damn.
And you can't do that if you are prolific, this is by no means to say that like a Stephen King or an Orson Scott Card isn't a good writer. They have really good stories to tell, but I've never gotten the sense from reading. I mean, I haven't read any Stephen King, but like I've never gotten the sense from reading Card or Chuck Palahniuk or even Terry Pratchett, who's also a very skilled writer, or was a very skilled writer. I never got the sense from any of them that like every word is chosen, every word is carefully crafted. I'm going to say what I need to say to get through this part of the story. And if I can throw a joke in there, I will, or if I can throw some insight into the character, I will. But does it really matter if I said or the in that sentence? I don't know. I don't really care that much. Or like, if I, how I describe this thing, it's a yellow jacket. Do I need to go into like the specific color of yellow? Do I need to compare it to a sunny, like the sun in a warm summer day, or the color of piss when you're dehydrated, or a school, but like, can I just call it a yellow jacket and leave it at that? But Foer will go into like, it was a yellow jacket. Now don't let me lead you astray when I say yellow jacket. I'm not talking about your average rain slicker. I'm talking about the kind, and then he'll go into 2 paragraphs of description over the kind of yellow that this jacket is. And then the really cool thing is that somehow matters, like you'd think like, oh, it's just frivolous text, it's color text. It's and I don't mean that in terms of describing the color, but it's just to sort of imbue the world with something more. In his tellings, that crap matters. Like going into that detail is important for something later in the story.
Nice.
So,
payoff. There's payoff to his stuff.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem so, because a lot of people would do that, and I know a lot of high thinking, both critics and auteurs, is like at that point, at some point, it's like self-indulgent.
Yeah.
But what it sounds like, so are you? I think you have a pretty good gauge to where you're like, okay, now you're just masturbating, like.
Yeah, well, and sometimes I don't know if it's necessarily masturbating. I look at someone like a Robert Ludlum, wrote the Bourne series, so like Bourne Identity,
which I have read.
Yeah.
Yay.
But you'll notice with Robert Ludlum, there's a tendency to over-describe. And I don't think that it's necessarily masturbatory. I think that he just wants to paint the picture too much, but ultimately he's describing things that don't matter. When there are things like Jason could hear the footsteps outside the door, he reached up over his shoulder with his left hand and pulled the strap that attached the holster from his waist to over his shoulder to just the right tightness so that he could reach his gun with his right hand. He pulled the gun up at a 45-degree angle. And you're just like, what if you just said he adjusted his holster so it was just at the right height so he could grab his gun quickly and efficiently? Do we need to describe like which hand is doing what and the angle at which he's drawing his gun from the holster? And is that important to the story, or is it just like, is it important to you, the author?
Yeah, I know, and he did that a lot, and it was hard to get through the beginning of some chapters because he I don't know if that's like a thing with authors, but also Tolkien did it. But
yeah.
And I'm speaking just from Lord of the Rings. I just finished Lord of the Rings not that long ago, but in Ludlum's stuff, it was very hard to have the energy to get through the chapter because he would describe, and he did it. I remember him doing it a lot in the Bourne Supremacy, because that one's set in Asia, and he spent the first part of the chapter. If you're somewhere new, he would describe the environment in great detail.
Yeah.
And after 2.5 pages of that, I'm like, okay, I get it. Like we're in somewhere. I want to know what Jason's doing. I want to know what his wife's doing, or the bad guys are like. I want to get to. Yeah. Because I don't know why you're telling me all this, and I guess in defense of Tolkien, he's really trying to describe Middle Earth to you.
Right.
But man, like
it's
such
the same thing.
Yeah, but in such detail that I'm like, it's really hard to pinpoint Middle Earth right now.
Yeah.
And I guess as far as for Ludlum, it wouldn't. I guess that's wrong. I was gonna say maybe it's the kind of way that Jason processes information, which would have been interesting.
Sure.
Since he's like a master assassin, he would probably take in an entire environment with a weird amount of detail in a very, very short amount of time. But I didn't get that sense.
Right. Yeah.
And
it doesn't seem to aid the story or the telling at all. And I'm right. Like after you've had that scene described to you, what does it matter?
Yeah.
Like how does that affect what's going on with Jason? How does how does the height of the buildings here make any difference to like that street chase that he's about to have? Like it doesn't seem to have any real effect. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, you're over describing and you're not doing it for any real purpose.
Now in Saffron Foer's case, that's not the case.
It pays off. And I'm not going to say that there aren't. I can't say that like every single word he's chosen is going to come back to the end of the novel, you know. But like,
which would be insane if it did. Like that'd be an insane amount of like.
Yeah, I mean that is. I don't think there's anybody alive who is that good. You know, even Tony Kushner, who I regard as one of the best writers, if not the best writer alive today, I don't think he could manage that.
Mr. Kushner, you mean the writer of Angels in America?
Angels in America, Bright Room Called Day, Munich, good movie. Just watch that. Go watch it once. Don't watch it a second time because you'll like. It's devastating to watch.